Hello and welcome everybody to this Lunch and Learn. My name is Patricia Houston and I would like to take a moment to thank every single person in here for joining us. In addition to that, I would like to remind everybody that this Lunch and Learn is brought to you by family partners of Morris and Sussex counties. Today is joining us Dr. Sussan Neigher and registered nurse Stacy Kallman. Welcome, Sussan and Stacy.
Thank you.
Thank you both for being here. So Sussan is the Vice President, Board and Trustees from the New Jersey Coalition of Human Trafficking, and Stacy is the co-chair of the Healthcare Committee. Today we are having a conversation about human trafficking, so I'm gonna pass on this presentation to Stacy and Sussan.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you very much for inviting us because we are very passionate about educating the community. And so Stacy, if you can start the slides, we find that it's easier to use slides so that you can absorb the information. And we are from the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking, which is an all-volunteer nonprofit organization. Our mission is to eradicate human trafficking in New Jersey. And then the next slide just says who we are. And then these are references for you, and they will recur throughout the presentation. So now, what is human trafficking? I'm going to start by reading the legal definition to you because you hear about it all the time in the news, but people really don't understand what it is. And by the way, it's good that this is being recorded because as we talk about it in more detail, it may be upsetting to some of you to hear what we're saying. And if you need to take a break, step away from the computer, turn off the volume. That's totally understandable, and you'll be able to pick up what you missed by watching the video. So first, let me ask you, how many of you have a cell phone? I would think everybody. How many of you like to drink a cup of coffee or eat a piece of chocolate? Probably almost all of you. Now, how many of you have ever eaten at a fast food restaurant and there's been a slice of tomato in your sandwich or your salad? Probably all of you. So now I would like to congratulate you because you have all supported the crime of human trafficking. Let me explain what I mean. When it comes to the smartphones, in the board that supports the software, one of the major ingredients there is the mineral mica. Where does mica come from? A lot of it is mined in India in big open pits, where from daylight to sunset, children as young as 6 stand in the pits and whack away at the rock with hammers. What about coffee and chocolate? 80% of it is grown by victims of labor trafficking, primarily women and children. And what about the tomatoes? I'll tell you about that later. But here's the legal definition of human trafficking. It is, I have to read this to you. Human trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of forced labor or sexual exploitation. And during our presentation, what we'll be doing is we'll give you examples so that you understand what I'm talking about, because right now it's just words. So Stacy, if you can click on the next part of this, sex trafficking, that's what makes the news all the time. And so It could happen anywhere. It could be at massage parlors. It could be at truck stops. It could be at hotels, like the hotel on Route 46 in Bud Lake, where a teenager was trafficked. It could be someplace that you've all been to. A sex trafficking ring based in Morristown recruited purchasers of sex at the Rockaway Mall. What about labor trafficking? You heard about the examples I just gave. Has anybody ever driven past the Morristown train station during morning rush hour? And you see all the men lined up on the sidewalk across the street? Those are day laborers looking for work. And not all, but a good number of them are victims of labor trafficking. And it may not be in plain sight like that. It could be like the housekeeper in Parsippany, who was given a written contract and legal papers to work in the United States, and instead found herself basically being imprisoned in somebody's house, working and not getting paid. So you see, I'm not talking about something way over in India or in West Africa. I'm talking about right here in Morris and Sussex counties. Now, I mentioned that force, fraud, or coercion have to be involved. Like with the housekeeper, she had a written contract of what she was supposed to do. She was forced to do other stuff. That's fraud. It was coercion because she was threatened. The people who kept her in their house said she'd be arrested if she went out on the streets because they had all her papers. So that's coercion. Now, there's one exception when you don't need force, fraud, or coercion, and that is with minors, anybody under the age of 18. It's not required for it to be considered trafficking. Even if a minor is a willing participant, if money or something else of value is exchanged by law, that person is considered a victim of human trafficking. That's why you've heard on the news about 17-year-old girls who had sex and in exchange had dinner or given a bus ticket. By law, that's human trafficking. And why do they do it? It's all about the money. This is big business. So Stacy, if you can hit that one, great. Now, Stacy's going to pick it up from here and give you more of an overview.
So what is not considered human trafficking? So now that we've gone over what is human trafficking and that it always involves force, fraud, or coercion, what is not? So human trafficking is not the same as smuggling. And it does not require physical movement across borders. So let me just explain that a little bit more. Smuggling is the moving of people across borders. It can be a risk factor for trafficking, but it is not considered trafficking if there's no force, fraud, or coercion involved. Victims can be trafficked from their homes or schools and never be moved. So we've had examples of survivors that have been trafficked and never moved anywhere, that were still in their homes. So smuggling is the transportation based. It involves the movement of people across borders. I'm pretty sure most of us have heard about people trying to get into the United States and trying to smuggle across the border. Usually it's the southern border that we hear about the most. And this is voluntary. So the person wants to come to the US and it's a crime against the US, but people try to smuggle them in and these people are usually paid, but that is not considered human trafficking. So just to clarify. So quick question, and you guys can just answer this for yourselves and then we'll go over it. What percentage do you think of trafficked persons are US citizens? And usually people err on the side of the lower end of the spectrum, but unfortunately the answer to this is 80%. 80% of trafficked people are US citizens. They can be trafficked all across the world, but the majority of the time they stay in the US. And then we're going to talk about where is human trafficking. So if you look at this slide, New Jersey ranks by state. Every year they rank by state. The National Human Trafficking Hotline, which we will be providing you the number for, and we hope you all put it in your phones later in the presentation. They rank by state the number of cases reported each year to the trafficking hotline. And human trafficking is everywhere, but it's a lot closer to home than most people realize. Looking at the global statistics, however, 80% of cases are labor trafficked in the global, globally. So that's usually forced labor, but 30% is usually only forced labor in the US. However, it flips. So 80% of sex trafficked survivors are US citizens, where and 70% in the US are sexual exploitation. So those are sex trafficked people, where only 20% are globally. So unfortunately, the numbers are as accurate as we can make them, but they only represent the cases that have been reported, and there's so many unreported cases. And the National Human Trafficking Hotline is the central place for reporting calls, and that's in the US. So between 2007 and 2019, New Jersey has ranked on average in the top 12 states for reports of human trafficking. And what does that mean? People call the hotline and they say, this is what I'm seeing, or, they're reporting what they believe may be a trafficking incident. Okay. Why? So your next question most people have is, why in New Jersey? Why here? People are usually surprised by the previous slide that we have such a high incidence of human trafficking, but why here? And the why is simple. It's just location. So when you go to buy a house, location, 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 right? Here, we have easy access to air and seaports, roads, trains. We have, we're very easily geographically positioned to be a hub for trafficking activity. We have interstate bordering major cities, New York City, Philly. We have Atlantic City. We're not that far from Washington, D.C. And New Jersey is a tourist destination. I can tell you that. I live in Monmouth County. A lot of people come down after Memorial Day to Monmouth County because the Jersey Shore is a fun place to hang out. So the Super Bowl in 2014, so in March of 2013, the Human Trafficking Task Force was created to address a known increase in demand. So whenever you have a big sporting event, there is a known increase in the demand for trafficked individuals. Unfortunately, that is, that's something that we know. And the human trafficking organizations usually stress that this is a year-round event, not just around large-scale events, but unfortunately the demand does increase. Such events as the Super Bowl, the Final Four, NASCAR, things like that. So the trafficking task force was created to keep an eye out for when we had the Super Bowl here a few years back. Okay. And why does human trafficking happen? Like Susan said before, trafficking is a very profitable business, right? Most of us have heard of drug trafficking. You've heard of, big cartels and things like that. If you watch Ozark, you know about trafficking. That's kind of what that show is about on Netflix. But it generates more money than guns or drugs, because guns and drugs can only be sold once, but people can be sold, and we use that term very loosely, over and over and over again. So money is the driving force between trafficking. And if we can reduce the demand for sex trafficking products and services from trafficked people, then we reduce human trafficking. And that's what our coalition really drives to educate people about. So in every country in the world except for one, the major contributing factor to human trafficking is poverty. The one exception is here. That's the US, where the breakdown of family, adverse childhood events, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the presentation as to why we have such a high incidence of human trafficking. But the social determinants are the major contributing factors here in the US, not in terms of poverty. And we'll talk about adverse childhood events and things of that nature. Crypto is also gaining currency and popularity with traffickers because it's harder to trace. I'm not sure if that will continue to be a trend in the future, however. Okay, and moving on, and I'm gonna kick this back to Susan, and she can talk about who can be affected by trafficking.
And the bottom line is that anyone can be. Now, here is where I'm going to share with you some real situations when it comes to the sex trafficking stories. These are people I have met but I am only sharing with you what they have shared in public forums, like on television or in documentaries. I'm not going to give you any of their personal history. I can only tell you all of these people have survived, or we wouldn't have met them. So the first thing is I want to go back to when I said, have you ever had a tomato in a fast food restaurant? And here is where tomatoes come from. Most of the tomatoes eaten in fast food restaurants are grown in Immokalee County, Florida, just a few miles east of affluent Naples. I've been there, I've seen it. Until a few years ago, the workers earned well below minimum wage. They had to live in what was available, company-owned housing, which was substandard, quite frankly. You couldn't even walk into these places. The workers were forced to work long hours in fields with no bathrooms and very little water or shade. Women were often sexually harassed and even assaulted by their bosses. Why didn't they just leave? Almost all of the workers were USA-born American citizens. The farm owners claimed that the workers owed more money in rent than they could afford to pay, and the owners withheld pay until the end of the growing season. The workers were essentially held in debt bondage. Fortunately, the workers organized. Just because somebody's poor doesn't mean they're not really bright. They organized and formed the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. In 2011, they negotiated the Fair Food Program. Walmart, Whole Foods, and all of the fast food chains except Wendy's buy only from participating suppliers. They, which have committed to pay 1 to 4 cents per pound. And with this extra pay, they are able to guarantee minimum wage for the workers and ensure workers' rights and safety. Wendy's, however, switched to buying their tomatoes from Mexico, where conditions are much worse. And don't think that it's just in Florida. Now, a lot of the workers are migrant workers. With the season, they move up the East Coast. They are working on farms in New Jersey, and they even travel all the way up to Bucolic, Vermont. So, this is real, and this is what you unwittingly supported. Now I'm going to give you 3 examples of sex trafficking. And I felt that it was telling the stories explains much more than we could in abstract words. So here's the first one. A friend of mine was working on her doctorate when her daughter started middle school. Anybody know anybody who's been in middle school? Isn't it a fun age to deal with? Right. Her daughter began to hang out with a group of friends my friend did not approve of. There were several arguments resulting in her daughter storming out of the house. That's never happened in a normal family, has it? After one of these arguments, her daughter went to her so-called friend's house. It turned out that her friend was a recruiter for a trafficker who developed friendships with girls and lured them to their houses. My friend's daughter was imprisoned by the trafficker and forced into the sex trade. She was moved around from town to town and state to state. My friend suspended grad school and spent the next 11 months working with police, sitting in squad cars in stakeouts and searching endlessly. Finally, after many missed calls, this is before cell phones, after many missed calls, her daughter was able to get to a payphone and reach her mother directly. Her daughter wasn't able to tell her where she was, but the police were able to track the call. My friend was able to enter the apartment where police located her and embraced her daughter after 11 long months. The next example is Marie. And I've changed these names. Marie was 15 years old from a small Midwestern town. She was a good girl who followed all of her parents' rules. She had a crush on a boy at school, and when he invited her to join his study group before a big test, she was thrilled. Of course, she asked if his mother was going to be home, and of course he said yes. When she got there, she didn't see his mother. She thought she should go home, but he was so cute and charming. He graciously offered her a glass of Coke. She took a few sips, and when she woke up, she was naked. He showed her stills and videos of her having sex with him. He threatened to show them not only to her parents, but to her school and her father's employer. She felt trapped. Every night, she had to sneak out of her own house. The boy would pick her up and take her to a different house each night where she had to have sex with several men. None of the men ever asked her what her name was. This went on for 2 years. After an especially horrific night, she stumbled into a diner, and the waitress saw that she was in distress and called for help. She said that despite this happening many years ago, if her trafficker were to appear at the door of the room that we were in, she would go to him. If he told her to get into his car, she would obey. She has never felt truly emotionally free. And the last example is Sarah, a nice Jewish girl from an affluent town near Morristown. She went off to a prestigious college in Boston, full of hope and excitement. 6 weeks after starting school, she met a few fellow students who invited her to an off-campus party. Why not, she thought. She could come and go without having to get into a stranger's car. When she arrived at the apartment, a man answered the door. He apologized. The party was the night before. Could he make it up to her by buying her dinner? No car, in public. Sarah said, okay. He was charming, and he took her out a few more times, meeting her in public places. Then he told her he would love to take her to an Italian restaurant in the North End. He'd pick her up in his car and drive her there. But instead, he drove to Chinatown, grabbed her purse and phone, and kicked her out of the car, demanding that she walk the circuit and recruit men for sex. She ran away as fast as she could, but he caught up with her in an alley and beat her. She was told that her fate would be even worse if she tried to escape. She lived like that for 2 years. The only thing that saved her was that she never used drugs. Most of the girls in his stable used drugs to numb their misery. However, they only had a 2-hour break every day. Sarah could either eat or sleep. She chose to sleep and lost 30 pounds. The hunger and exhaustion numbed her feelings, but her brain was still clear enough to be able to escape one day. She only feels safe now because she knows that the trafficker is dead. So these are real examples. They're horrifying. And it shows you that it could happen to anybody in any economic category, from poverty to affluence. And Stacy, if you can go to the next slide, we can all do something to prevent it, because education is prevention, and you are being educated now. Now, I'd like to point out, this is what makes people especially vulnerable. And number one is being young. The examples I gave you were middle school, high school, college. And in fact, in New Jersey, the typical age that somebody is tricked into trafficking is between the age of 12 and 14. That's middle school. The other things are when people feel marginalized, when there's problems at home. And that's why it's so important to speak with you, because your kids might feel left out, they might feel vulnerable, they might feel that they don't fit in. And these people are really vulnerable, but you can protect them. So in the next slide, you'll see that it can happen anywhere. And I gave you examples already. I just want to point out a couple of things. One is familial trafficking. The National Hotline analyzed their data from the last year. And this is very shocking and upsetting. In their data of reported cases, 40% of child trafficking was done by a family member. Not necessarily a parent, it could be an aunt or an uncle, but a lot of it is in families. I just want to tell you what survival sex is. And that is when you do something because that's the only way that you can survive. And I'll give you an example of a teenager I met who ran away from home because of a difficult home situation, ended up on the streets of Dover. Some of you might be in Dover right now. And two men approached her and said, listen, we'll give you a place to live if you have sex with us. And she said, okay, I don't know what else to do. But then once she was there, then they forced her to have sex with all sorts of customers. And at that point, she was able to be approached by an outreach worker who got her a safe place to be. And the last one is online. And I will give you one example that happened to me about 6 months ago. And this is a teenage girl that I'm working with, lives in Morris County. She was really looking forward to being old enough to get a driver's license, and she had an after-school job, but she wasn't making nearly enough money to be able to buy a car. So she's chatting with some guy online, and he says, you know, you really brighten my day. I know how much you want to be able to buy a car. And so I will give you $600 a week if you just talk with me every day. Well, this was too good to be true. But the money started arriving in her bank account. And then, because she's a minor, her mother also had access to the bank statement and said, what's this? And the girl very innocently told her. And the mother, being educated, and this is where I'm talking about education is crucial. The mother said, this is grooming. This is a predator who is grooming my daughter. And in fact, they went to the police to report it. And that very same week, the man online said, I've been giving you money for a while. Now you owe me. And so this is how it can happen online. And Stacy is going to tell you more about it now.
So like Sussan said, we saw a definite uptick during the lockdown, during the pandemic lockdown back in March of 2020 with online groomers, because everything was locked down and these kids spent enormous amounts of time online. And they will find a way into a youth's life. They'll give them likes on social media. They'll give them V-Bucks. Fortnite was very big a few years ago, and everybody wanted V-Bucks for things that they could buy. And the thing that we want to drive home, the point that we want everybody to understand, is that traffickers are master manipulators. They know how to use the internet or even real world to groom victims and form a bond. People talk about when we tell them that we're in the Coalition Against Human Trafficking, about the white van. And can that happen? Absolutely, it can. However, we're finding a lot more real world examples of where traffickers groom their victims, and that's just the term that we use, in order to form the bond and to form trust with their victims. And Sussan just gave some amazing examples of how they do that. If you want more education, please feel free to go to our website. It says it right on the bottom. It's safernj.org. And we have a whole tab dedicated to protecting children from internet predators. But this can lead to exploitation and trafficking with threats and coercion, and sexual exploitation and trafficking. So they'll start to form the trust, and then it can lead into that. The next thing I'm going to show you, and I had actually seen this when I went to a presentation years ago at my son's school, was 15 apps that parents should know about. And if you have a cell phone and you want to take a picture of this slide, I would strongly recommend that you do so, and then talk to your kids about these apps. Bumble and Kick are, you can have direct contact with people. And like I had gone over before, during the pandemic, there was such a significant rise in online sexual exploitation of youth. And, you know, I'll have you reference our website. And there are many more apps, and unfortunately, they're coming out with new ones every day. But what we implore you to do is, as parents, or aunts or uncles, or if you know young people, you work with young people, pay attention to where your child is going online. And that's really the key. Encourage parents to always be a safe place for children to come to and talk to. With the example that Sussan gave before, it's a great example that her daughter was completely forthcoming about where that money was coming from in her bank account. And if her daughter felt that she couldn't talk to her mother about it, we don't know how that would have ended. But we have to be the safe space for the kids. To never cause your, you know, children to be afraid to talk to you about these things. And we do have, if you go to safernj.org, that's our website, /prevent online grooming. That's a great place to get more information. Okay. And we would like to educate you as well as to the red flags of exploitation and abuse. And you can see them right here. Knowing what to look for is a huge step in preventing human trafficking. And the National Human Trafficking Hotline is here on the right. If you would please take your phones out and take a picture of it, or just put it directly in your phone. You can call that number, the 888-373-7888 number, or you can even text help or info to be free, and the number is there. We would love for you to watch out for these red flags in your community. And it's also available on our website. But if you see something, then say something. These youth may be reluctant to speak. They may be with an older adult and it doesn't look like a comfortable relationship. And most of the time, if your gut tells you that something's not right, then something's probably not right. And just call the National Human Trafficking Hotline and they'll tell you how to proceed. Alienation.
I'd just like to jump in and
Sure.
and underscore, the last thing you want to do is ask the person directly, are you being trafficked? They probably, if they do realize that they're being trafficked, they're going to be afraid to tell you. And if you talk about it directly to them, you are endangering them because the trafficker is always hovering, and you are endangering yourself. And that's why it's so important, if you suspect it, that you call the hotline and ask them what to do.
Okay. But we also need you guys to understand that if you strongly suspect that somebody under the age of 18, a minor, is being trafficked, then we need to report that, because that is a minor. You can offer resources, but it's up to that person whether or not they want to accept your help. But you can report it. We are mandated to report it to DCPMP as healthcare workers and just people in the community. You can call the human trafficking hotline and you can tell them, I suspect that this person is under the age of 18. They look very young, and they'll tell you how to proceed. If you have the number to DCPMP, you can call them as well. But like Sussan said, please don't put yourself in the middle of a situation that, you know, we don't want you to endanger yourself. And that's why we tell you about the trafficking hotline. That's your best, you know, way to go.
And I just want to add again, do not talk to the parents about it, because if they truly are being trafficked, there is a very good chance that somebody in the family is the trafficker. So DCPMP can decide whether to talk to the parents, can decide whether or not to call the police. And you would call 911 if you feel that somebody is in immediate danger. But if you're just suspecting it, call the hotline and they will know which law enforcement in your area you should contact.
All right, perfect. And we get a question a lot when we do these presentations or we're out discussing human trafficking out in the community. Why don't the victims leave? That's a frequently asked question. And it's a reasonable question, but victims may not even know they're being trafficked while it's happening. I've heard that from several victims who have survivors that have told their stories. They were not aware that they were being trafficked. They just knew that the situation that they were in was not a good one, but they weren't aware that that was happening at the time. And there's also a lot of manipulation and isolation. So they'll take the survivor's cell phone, they'll take their bags, they'll take their, driver's license or their passport. So there's a lot of manipulation. These traffickers are very good at what they do, unfortunately, and they're very manipulative. They also may be concerned about what's called victim shaming or victim blaming. And that's another thing that we hear quite often is I didn't tell anybody because I didn't think anybody would believe me. So if somebody comes to you and says, look, I'm in a situation and I don't know what to do, just ask them for more information. And then you can call the hotline and see, where to proceed from there. And victim shaming and blaming can occur when the victim of a crime or any wrongful act is held entirely or partially at fault for the victim for the harm that happened to them. So, we've heard that a lot. I didn't say anything because I didn't think anybody would believe me. And the other thing that I wanted to point out on this slide is that a trauma bond will often develop between trafficker and victim. A lot of times the trafficker will offer the victim a place to stay. They'll feed them, albeit small amounts of food, but they're still feeding them. So they may feel that bond with the trafficker that although this person is exploiting me, they're still helping to take care of me. So that's also, something that we want you to understand. And the other thing on this slide I'd like to point out is the victims can be shamed and told no one else will love you now or ever. I'm the only one. And eventually, if you're told that often enough, and these people have had childhood events that have made them feel like nobody else in the world loves them, they may start to believe it, unfortunately, and very sadly.
So anyway, just very briefly to pull this together, the coalition, the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking, is actually a coalition of over 180 affiliated organizations, including faith-based groups, community service groups, service providers, and law enforcement, so that we all work together in a coordinated way. And one of our biggest tools is to educate the public like you're being educated now, educate specific professions like healthcare and education. And we also advocate one of the laws that was passed a couple of years ago and implemented this past January, mandates that all children in public schools K through 12 be told about human trafficking in an age-appropriate way to keep them safe. And just this past January, we helped to develop the website that has the curriculum for teachers. And then in the next slide, what can you do? The most important thing you can do is to tell everybody you know. Share this knowledge you've just acquired. That's the most important thing. You can buy fair trade. For example, I have coffee here that there is... I don't know if you can see that because I can't see me. But anyway, there's a logo here. Not all Green Mountain coffee have this logo, but if you buy this, you know that it was slave-free. And the same thing for slave-free chocolate. So there are things like that you can do. If you want more information, you can go to our website. You see it in the corner. You can sign up if you want to be notified of public education events. You can join a committee through the website. You can request that another organization that you belong to receive a training like this. So there are many things that you can do. And then in the next slide, again, there's the national hotline number. It can save lives. It can answer your questions, and you can definitely, again, you can take a picture of this one because this also has our website. And then finally, we just want to ask for your feedback. If you have any questions and we don't have time to answer them today, you can email me because I have one of the official coalition email addresses, and you can ask me anything you want. And also we would like you, while you have your phones out to do the other stuff, please scan the QR code or click on the link right now that that takes you to a very quick survey. We keep changing and improving our presentations from the feedback of everybody who attends. We also need, we need to have this feedback so we can apply for grants to support our work. One of the big things that we do is that we have survivor consultants with lived experience, and we always pay them for their time. We never want to risk exploiting them any further. So our grants help us to be able to pay our consultants. All the people who are not consultants, it's all, we do this for free. So I think we could go back to the full screen, and we're ready for questions.
Sussan and Stacy, I just want to say thank you very much for doing that presentation for us. And we are gonna turn off the recorder to allow time for Q&A. But before we do that, I just want to also thank every single person for joining us. So now it's time for Q&A, and I'm gonna turn off the recorder. Thank you very much, everybody.